I'm very honored now, as they say in this, as his colleagues say in the Senate, I'm going to yield my table to the great senator from Vermont, who's going to tell us all what he will be and we should be doing in 2017, the great Bernie Sanders.
Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you all for coming out. Thank you. But as I think many of you have heard me say a million times, this is not about Bernie, it is about you and us. Let me thank you all for coming out. Let me thank Miami-Dade College for hosting the event and Ron Goldfarb for his very generous introduction. I want to talk obviously about the book, but I suspect there are one or two other things on your mind. So we'll talk about that as well. All right, let's get going. Point number one. Hillary Clinton ended up getting 1.5 million more votes than Donald Trump. Don't forget about that. So if anyone tells you that Mr. Trump has a mandate to go forward with some of his very reactionary ideas, tell them that he lost the popular vote by 1.5 million votes. Number two. And this is also important, and I just want all of you to understand that I've been around this country, I've been in this business for a while, and what I'm telling you is the truth. On virtually, not all, but on virtually every major issue facing this country, whether it is raising the minimum wage to a living wage, whether it is pay equity for women who are now making 79 cents on the dollar compared to men, whether it is creating millions of decent paying jobs by rebuilding our crumbling infrastructure, whether it is criminal justice reform, immigration reform, on all of those issues and many more, campaign finance reform, on all of those issues, guess what? Vast majority of the American people are on our side. And when somebody goes and tells you that Republicans have some kind of mandate to cut Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid, or to give tax breaks to billionaires, or to ignore the overwhelming scientific evidence regarding climate change, tell your friends who tell you that they are dead wrong. Now, let me just suggest to you why I think Trump did as well as he did, and then suggest to you in a very broad sense where I think we have to go, then we'll get into the book. What is going on in this country in terms of the pain that many people are feeling is not reported in the media, and it is not dealt with in the halls of Congress. It's a funny thing, in the book you'll notice there's a chapter where I talk about the corporate media, something I'll talk a little bit about tonight. And it turns out, and I say this not being, bragging here, it turns out somebody did a study, and they said that over the course, I think it was, of the year, 2/3 of the discussion on Sunday morning news shows about poverty was from Bernie Sanders. The point is not me. The point is, where the hell is everybody else? I mean, how do you... So what you have in our country today is a lot of pain and a lot of suffering that we don't talk about in the Congress, with few exceptions, that's certainly never on NBC or CBS or the media. And you got millions of people out there who are saying to themselves, who hears my pain? Who knows that I am alive? Who gives a damn about me? And one of the reasons that I'm going to do everything that I can to reform the Democratic Party is that I want the Democratic Party to hear the pain. And I want to just run through. I want you just to follow me for a second. Let's think about it. Right now in Miami, right now in Burlington, Vermont, there are single moms, go to work, they need good quality child care. They make $40,000, $50,000 a year, maybe or maybe less, but child care costs $10,000 or $15,000. How do you have decent quality child care if it costs $15,000 or $20,000 a year and you're making $50,000 a year or less? Who talks about that issue? Seen it lately on NBC or CBS? See politicians talking about it? No, you don't. We are the only major country on earth not to guarantee health care to all people as a right. Today in America, despite the gains of the Affordable Care Act, 28 million people have no health insurance at all, and many of you and tens of millions of Americans who do have health insurance have deductibles and co-payments that are so high that you don't go to the doctor when you should. And then we see thousands of people dying every single year because they walk into the doctor's office when it is too late. And the doctor says, why didn't you come in 6 months or a year before when you first got your symptom? And the person says, I didn't have any insurance or I couldn't afford the deductible. We lose thousands of people every single year. Right now in America, 1 out of 5 people who goes to a doctor's office because they're sick and they get a prescription, you know what? 1 out of those 5 people cannot afford to fill the prescription. Elderly people here in Miami and in Vermont, all over this country, you know what they do? They cut their prescription pills in half, which is a bad thing to do because they can't afford the medicine they need. And every day, drug companies are jacking up the price for one reason alone, because they can get away with that. Who is hearing? Who is paying attention to the people who can't afford the medicine they desperately need? Let me tell you a story about how corrupt the system is. I was out in California a couple of weeks ago working on a proposition there called Proposition 61. Most of you don't know it. What it was an effort on the part of the people of California to lower the cost of prescription drugs in their state. Anyone want to take a guess as to how much money the pharmaceutical industry spent in opposition to that proposition? To take a guess. No, not $1 billion, it's not go. $131 million. 48, as I understand it, 48% of the people voted for it. It lost after the industry spent $131 million. And that raises not only the issue of the high cost of prescription drugs, what else does it raise? It raises the issue of campaign finance reform and how we're going to bring about any change in this country when the drug companies and the insurance companies and the Koch brothers and other billionaires are able to spend unlimited sums of money. When Donald Trump talks about taking on the establishment, there are workers out there who are making $9, $10 an hour who listen to him. And he said he's going to raise their wages, and they're making $10 an hour. You cannot live on $10 an hour. Almost half of the older workers in America, people 55 or older, have no money in the bank for when they retire. You got that? You're 55 or 60, you're going to retire in 5 years, you got no money in the bank. You're getting sick, you need health care. How are you going to retire with no money in the bank? Millions of people scared to death about going into retirement. You got young people today, bright young people who do well in high school. They can't even afford to go to college. And then you got others leaving college, $40,000, $50,000, $60,000 in debt, and they're making $12, $14 an hour, and they don't know how they're going to be able to pay off that debt. I was in during the course of the campaign, and one of the things that I did in the book was I talked about some of the places that I went to, and I tried to go to places that other candidates often don't go. And I went to a county in West Virginia called McDowell County. It's in the southern part of West Virginia. And in that county, and in counties all over that state, and in Kentucky and elsewhere, turns out that people today, unbelievably, are now dying at a younger age than their parents. The whole drift of modern society in America and around the world is as a result of public health, as a result of medical breakthroughs, and we've seen some great breakthroughs on cancer, other illnesses. People live longer lives. There are millions of Americans today in various parts of this country, working class people, who are dying at a younger age than their parents. They are dying as a result of drug addiction, of alcoholism, and of suicide. In other words, the despair is so great among people who are trying to get by a $9, $10 an hour. They're worried about their kids. They are going nowhere, and life overcomes them, and they turn to drugs and alcohol and suicide. And Donald Trump said, I know that. I went to Pine Ridge, Native American reservation. Because I tried to focus some attention on the plight, on the tragedy that faces many Native American communities throughout our country. People have been lied to, people have been cheated, people have been ignored. In Pine Ridge in South Dakota, the life expectancy, as I understand it, is equivalent to Guatemala, a poor third world country. Youth suicide, very high. Unemployment, rampant. Domestic abuse, terrible. I was in Baltimore, Maryland. Thousands and tens of thousands of people are addicted to heroin, and no treatment is available for them. I was in New York City, went to the public housing projects there. They have a backlog of $17 billion to repair public housing in New York City. $17 billion. People are living in dilapidated public housing. And on it goes. So what's my point? My point is, if you think that Trump won simply because everybody who voted for him is a racist or a sexist or a xenophobe, you would be mistaken. Yes, there are those people who did vote for Trump for those reasons. But I think what Trump managed to tap is the anger and the frustration that so many people feel, who are ignored, who are forgotten, who are suffering. And our job, and I will do everything in my power. I just a few days ago became an official member of the Democratic leadership. And that means, what I intend to do in that position is to make it very clear that the Democratic Party cannot have two masters. It cannot bow down to Wall Street and the drug companies and corporate America. And then tell the working people of this country, who for the last 40 years have seen a shrinking of the middle class, millions of whom are working longer hours for lower wages. You can't tell them that we're on their side when we're hustling money from Wall Street. So the Democratic Party has got to make it clear which side it's on, and I'm going to do everything I can to make certain that it is on the side of the working families of this country. Now, during the course of his campaign and before his campaign, Donald Trump has said and done some horrific things regarding minorities and immigrants. I want all of you not to forget that before Mr. Trump was even a candidate for president, he was a leader of the so-called Birther movement. And do not mistake for 1 second what that so-called Birther movement was: a racist attempt to undermine the legitimacy of the first African-American president in our history. That's what it was. Now, you can disagree all you want with Barack Obama. It's called democracy. But it is not acceptable to try to undermine his legitimacy as Trump did by suggesting that he was not born in the United States of America. And I hope very much that Mr. Trump, who is nobody's fool, I hope very much that he understands the damage that he has done to our country, internally and around the world, not only with his disrespect to the African American community, but the ugly language he has used on Mexican Americans, his belief that we should ban people of one of the largest religions in the world, Muslims, from coming into this country, the language that he has used, which I cannot even quote, regarding women and his attitude toward women. Now, I don't have to tell anybody here that for hundreds of years, from before this country became a country, when the first settlers came here and treated the Native American people so horrifically, from then through slavery, through sexism, through homophobia, through the attacks and prejudice against the Irish and the Italians and the Jews and every other nationality that came here, the struggle for 200 years has been a fight against discrimination. A fight, to paraphrase Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., that we judge people not by the color of their skin, but by their character as human beings. That has been the struggle. And when we remember that 50, 60 years ago, African Americans of the South didn't even have the right to vote, when we remember 100 years ago, women were not running for president, they didn't have the right to vote. They couldn't get the education or the jobs they wanted. When 30 years ago, no time at all, people in the gay community hid their sexuality because of the retribution that would occur to them if they stood up and said that they were gay. We have a right as a nation to be proud in how far we have come. Now, we got a long way to go. Racism, sexism, homophobia still exists, no question about it. But we do have a right to be proud that we have gone a long, long way in fighting all forms of discrimination. And in fact, what I can tell you without the slightest hesitancy, that the younger generation of today is the least racist, the least sexist, the least homophobic in the history of this country. And I say all of that. I say all of that because I want you for a moment to reflect. Reflect upon those very brave people who stood up for civil rights long before Martin Luther King Jr. did. You know, way back 150 years ago, people were thrown in jail, beaten, lynched, fighting for justice. Think about the women who went on hunger strikes, who went to jail, who died, demanding that women not be second-class citizens. The struggle of the gay community, etc., etc. We have come a long way, and what I say to Mr. Trump, we are not going backwards. And, you know, all of us All of us who know history understand that it is the easiest thing in the world for demagogues to pick on minorities. When people are hurting and in pain, it is very easy to say, there is your enemy. Some guy who's picking tomatoes here in Florida making $8 an hour, there's your enemy. Or a little girl who wears a scarf, there is your enemy. Or some African American down the street, there is your enemy. Our job, and it is the job of the majority in this country, to stand with the minorities. And on this issue, there cannot be compromise. We have come too far. We are going to defend human rights and civil rights and the rights of women in this country. And there's another area which concerns me. And I say all these things because, you know, in politics, in the Congress, people disagree on education and health care, and we yell at each other and we argue, but some issues I think we cannot compromise. And I just gave you one, I'll give you another one. And here in Miami, I think you are very well aware of this. Donald Trump went through his campaign, of course the media didn't pay much attention to it, but when they did, what we did learn is that he believed that climate change is a hoax. I am a member of the U.S. Senate Committee on the Environment, and in that capacity, I have spoken to scientists not only throughout our country, but all over the world. The almost unanimous conclusion of the scientific community is that climate change is real, it is caused by human activity, and it is already doing devastating harm in this country and throughout the world. The debate is over. And if we do not get our act together, what the scientists are telling us, that the situation will deteriorate significantly, there will be more drought, there will be more floods. Miami, there will be more rising sea levels, and I think you're beginning to experience that already. There will be more acidification of the ocean and the incredible impact that has on marine life. There will be more global conflict as people fight over limited natural resources such as water and land to grow their crops. I hope that Mr. Trump understands that it is far more important to listen to the scientific community than it is to the fossil fuel industry. In the Senate and in the House, you are going to find many members standing up and fighting as hard as we can against some of the ugly proposals that Mr. Trump raised during the campaign and may bring forward as president. But at the end of the day, in my view, and I speak only for myself, we are going to win this battle not in the halls of Congress where we're outnumbered. We're going to win this battle in grassroots America. And what that means, and this is not rhetoric, trust me, this is a fact and something that every American has got to learn. Democracy is not a spectator sport. Every person in this room is a powerful person if you choose to exercise your power. And your power is not just voting once every 2 years. Your power is 365 days a year. And your power is not, as I hope occurs, not just running great candidates for school board and city council and way on up, but your power is figuring out how you deal with problems, bringing people together. Because at the end of the day, when millions of Americans stand on the side of progress, stand on the side of ending discrimination, stand on the side of workers' rights, stand on the side of protecting our environment, when we stand up, when we are involved, when we fight back, no power on earth, not Donald Trump, not the Koch brothers, not anybody will stop us, and that is what we have to do. Let me say a few words about the book, which that's why I came here in the first place. But the first part of the book deals with the campaign. And those of you who are interested in politics will find it, I think, interesting. And we talk about why I decided to run against the sensible opposition of my wife, Jane, who's sitting out here someplace. She, being smarter than me, said, why in God's name would you want to do this? And by the way, one of the things that we mentioned in the book that she worried about, and I worried about, is that if we won, what would happen the day after? What would Wall Street do? What would corporate America do? Would they punish the American people for having voted for me? Probably. What would the corporate media have done? Think about it. But that was one of her worries, and it was a perceptive worry. But unfortunately, we didn't have to worry about that. I wish we would have, but we didn't. Anyhow, we talked about a campaign, which, as Ron Goldfarb mentioned, we started off with virtually nothing. I know something about politics in my own state of Vermont. And by the way, in the summer, when it gets a little hot here, come visit us. You'll find it a bit cooler. We're a very beautiful state. We're a small state. We have about 625,000 people. And I know how to campaign in my own state. In my last election, I got 71% of the vote. So we know how to do that pretty well. But running for U.S. Senate in Vermont is very different than running for President of the United States. And we started off knowing virtually nothing about how to do that. And we talked about what we learned and how we progressed. And what I did, very often candidates say, when asked if they're going to run, they say, well, they're talking to people and so forth. Actually, that was the case with me. What we did is we went around the country, and I wanted to hear what people said. Did people really want a candidacy and a candidate who was prepared to take on the economic establishment, the political establishment? Did they really want that? And as I went around the country, again, as somebody who was not very well known at that point, what I found in meetings all over the country, hundreds of people were coming out. And yes, they were sick and tired of establishment politics and establishment economics. And that's what I picked up. We went around the country. And finally, we decided, we would do it. And we went forward. And then what we saw is, as we made, when you run a campaign, as you can think about it, okay, what do you do? And we decided, for a number of reasons, that we would make rallies, meetings like this, although a little bit larger than this often, the cornerstone of the campaign. Because for a variety of reasons, when a lot of politicians use people like yourselves right now as kind of a backdrop, because what's important is the TV cameras. You understand what I'm saying? You're just a backdrop for the TV cameras. But I don't like that. I like talking to people. I like being here. I like looking you in the eye, and I like answering questions. And what we found as we went around the country, that more and more people were coming out. And it is a bit of a mind-blowing experience walking out in an arena in Portland, Oregon, where the Trailblazers play, the NBA team, and looking out at 28,000 people. And I think there were people outside. So The other thing that we try to do, we understood politically, if you run in the primaries, we have a pretty crazy system in that everybody in politics knows that the first states are very, very important. And the first two states were Iowa first, and then a week later, New Hampshire. So what we understood is what every politician who runs for president understands. If you do poorly in those states, you kind of get pushed aside and you don't last very much longer. So we had to focus on Iowa and New Hampshire. And what we did, which I loved very much, is I had the opportunity in a small state like Iowa to go to 101 rallies and meetings and town meetings, just like this, meetings exactly like this, all over the state of Iowa. And it ended up that I ended up talking personally, face to face, with something like 3/4 of the people who ended up voting for me in the Democratic caucus. Isn't that amazing? I mean, that is old-fashioned politics. That is old-fashioned grassroots politics, where you talk to people, people ask you questions, and then they go out and vote. In New Hampshire, the numbers weren't quite that large, but we talked to a whole lot of people, and we did very, very well. And what I point out is that, you know, we got off to a good start, but it is hard to do that when you got 6 or 7 states coming up on the same day, and that became hard for us. The other point that I would relate to you, and Ron mentioned this as well, is to run a national campaign for president, you need to raise a lot of money. There's no ifs, buts, and maybes about it. And we had no idea how we were going to raise money. And then suddenly, I mean, it was just unbelievable. From day one, through the internet, people started sending in money. Blew us away. And we ended up having 2.8 million separate people, individuals, contributing an average of $27 apiece to the campaign. And many of those people, and the other thing, there was an article in the LA Times that I read, and it was almost difficult to read. It really made you want to cry, is that it turned out that a majority of the people who contributed to the campaign, the guy studied the stuff and he got on the phone, turns out were below median family income. They were poor people. They were people getting unemployment. They were old people on Social Security. A majority of the people were below the median income level of America. So we're being supported. I mean, that is a very humbling experience. You know, it is one thing to go to Wall Street and to walk out of a fundraiser with $10 million. It is another thing to get checks of $10 and $15 from people who are on Social Security. So that was just an extraordinarily gratifying experience. If you would ask me, you know, people say, well, you know, what was, you know, the most significant thing in the campaign? On a personal level, I'll tell you what it was. It was doing rallies all over the country, and at the end of the campaign in June, the last day was June 7th in California and 5 other states, and we spent a lot of time in California, running up and down the state. And we held rallies in very rural areas where presidential candidates never go. And on a beautiful evening, there'd be 5,000, 10,000 people coming out, often young Latino kids, African-American kids, white kids, Native Americans were playing an active role. And you look out at a crowd of such a diverse audience, such beautiful young people who have such hopes for this country. That is what inspired me then, and that is what inspires me today, and that is what should inspire all of you. What I want you to know, election results notwithstanding, there are millions of people in this country who love this country passionately, who want to see this country become what we all know it can become. And I had the opportunity, a privilege, to actually see and meet with so many of those people, and that is something that I will live with for the rest of my life. Well, anyhow, the first half of the book deals with the campaign, and if you're interested in politics, I think you'll find it interesting. The second half does something a little bit different. And what it says is, how do we go forward? We are the wealthiest nation in the history of the world. That's what we are today. And there is no excuse for 43 million people living in poverty. No excuse for us having the highest rate of childhood poverty of almost any major country on earth. No excuse for having more income and wealth inequality than any other major country on earth, where the top 1/10 of 1% now owns as much wealth as the bottom 90%, where people in Florida are working 2 or 3 jobs, and yet 52% of all new income goes to the top 1%. So what I did in the second half of the book is I took a hard look at what I believe are the major issues facing this country, and working with some other people, we wrote down what we think the future means in terms of going forward. Where do we go from here? It's one thing to say, well, isn't this too bad? But it is another thing to say, okay, what do we do? So let me just take a few minutes to talk about what I consider to be some of the major issues. And one of the goals of our campaign, which I think we pretty much succeeded in, was to force debate on issues that politicians in general do not talk about and that the corporate media almost never talks about. And one of those issues is my fear that this country is moving very rapidly into an oligarchic form of society. Now, I think most Americans may not even know what the word oligarchy means, but it is a word that we better start understanding, because that is exactly where we are moving toward. Now, what does that mean? What it means is you have a relatively small number of very wealthy people, billionaires, who increasingly control not only our economic life, but our political life as well. It means that on Wall Street, for example, you have the 6 largest financial institutions, just 6, that have assets of some $10 trillion, which is equivalent to 58% of the GDP of the United States of America. 6 financial institutions which issue something like 2/3 of our credit cards and 1/3 of the mortgages. 6 financial institutions. It means, and I talk about this in a whole chapter, that it turns out you got 6 major media conglomerates in this country, Time Warner and CBS and others, that determine about how 90%, that control about 90% of the media in America in determining what people see, hear, and read. When you turn on your TV and you think you got 100 channels out there, and you think maybe 100 different companies own them, they don't. They're owned by relatively few large conglomerates, which are themselves controlled by bigger entities. The function of media is not to educate the American people. The function of corporate media is to make as much money as it possibly can. And I think what we saw in this last campaign, and there are studies that write about this, is that over 90% of the discussion you saw on television was not about the issues that impact your lives. It was about political gossip or about Mr. Trump or Mrs. Clinton, not about the American people. It was about polling and campaign funds and how much money people raised, terrible things that people said about each other. We need a media, among other things, that starts talking about the real issues facing the American people, not just the candidates. And we have a chapter that talks not just about oligarchy, where we are, but how we end a rigged economy. What does a rigged economy mean? It means that over the last 20, 30 years, there has been a massive transfer of wealth in this country. And that transfer has gone from your pockets, from the pockets of the middle class, into the pockets of the top 1/10 of 1%. Massive transfer of wealth. And we talk about how do we create an economy, to paraphrase Pope Francis, which is based on moral principles rather than greed. And these are some of the things that have to be done. We have got to determine as a principle in our economy that if you work 40 hours a week, you do not live in poverty. That means raising the minimum wage to a living wage. If we raise the minimum wage to a living wage of $15 an hour, millions of people would be taken out of poverty and would be able to live lives of dignity, spending time with their kids, not under incredible stress. It means that in the year 2016, when we talk about jobs and the economy, we have got to end the disgrace of women making 79 cents on the dollar compared to men. It means when we talk about the economy that we have to understand that the unemployment figures you see once a month come out from the government, the official unemployment rate, which nationally is about 5%, is different than the real unemployment rate in this country, which is over 9%, including, if you include people who are working part-time when they want to work full-time, or people in high unemployment areas who have given up looking for work. So you have, in real terms, 9% of our population unemployed. And that means we need a massive jobs program. We should be hiring teachers, not firing teachers. We can hire a heck of a lot of people doing the important work of child care, which today is dysfunctional. We should be rebuilding our crumbling infrastructure, roads, bridges, water systems. Jane and I, during the campaign, were in Flint, Michigan. And we had one of the most emotional evenings, I think, that we have ever had in our lives. And that is talking to a mom whose daughter had been gregarious and bright and doing well in school, but after drinking the lead in the water, became a child in special education who had a hard time remembering simple things. And when you talk to a mom who had gone through that, it takes a lot out of you. But it is not just Flint, Michigan that is struggling with clean water. There are hundreds of communities all over this country, including some in my own state of Vermont. Point is that in America, we once had the best cutting-edge infrastructure in the world, the best bridges, the best roads, strongest rail system, best levees, best dams. That is no longer the case. By heavily investing in our infrastructure, we can create millions of good-paying jobs. And that is exactly what we have to do. When we talk about the economy, common sense tells us all, and we're here at an excellent community college. It tells us that if we are going to compete effectively in a highly competitive global economy, we need to have the best educated workforce in the world. You know, that's kind of a no-brainer. And you know what? We once did. And the book goes into that. I think it's 30 years ago. We had a higher percentage of college graduates or people who attended college than any other country on earth. That is no longer the case. We're way down, and the gap between us and other countries is growing wider. Now, how do you have a workforce that can handle new jobs which require a lot of technology and advanced learning? How do you have a workforce that can do those things if we have hundreds of thousands of bright young people who can't even afford to go to college and others who are leaving school deeply in debt? So what the book talks about is the need to get our national priorities right, which says that billionaires like Donald Trump and his friends should start paying their fair share of taxes. That corporations, profitable corporations, making billions a year in profit, should no longer be able to stash their profits in the Cayman Islands or Bermuda and not pay a nickel in federal taxes. That Wall Street speculation should be taxed, and that when you do that, you suddenly find that you do have the money you need to make public colleges and universities tuition free, and to substantially lower the burden of student debt on millions of people who today are in trouble. So what the book says is it's kind of commonsensical. Who is going to argue against the fact that we need a well-educated workforce if we are going to succeed as an economy and as a nation? Hard to argue. Who will argue that the cost of college is unaffordable for so many people? Who will argue that millions of our people, when they leave school in $50,000 debt, $100,000 debt, go to graduate school, medical school, $300,000 debt? Who will argue that that is not insane? That we should be encouraging people to get the education they need, not discouraging people. Again, this is just common sense. And when you think about it, everyone nods their head, but we don't talk about it enough. So the question then, how do you make college affordable? How do you make public colleges and universities tuition free? There is a program out there that I played an active role in expanding. It's called the National Health Service Corps. Very few people have heard of it. Anyone here heard of the National Health Service Corps? Okay, good. It's a great program. And what it says, and we got billions into it, what it says is if you are a doctor, a dentist, do you have a problem with affordable dentistry here in Florida? Okay, it's a big problem in my state. But if you're a doctor, a dentist, a psychologist, a nurse, if you are prepared when you graduate school to serve in a medically underserved area, the government will forgive your student debt. And that works. It's a program that works very, very well. I think we should expand that concept to say that at a time when we desperately need good teachers and child care workers, people in law enforcement, that if you're prepared to serve in the public, we will forgive your debt. Book talks about another issue that you'll hear very little discussion about in the media or in the halls of Congress. Simple question. How many major countries on earth do not guarantee health care to all of their people? Anyone know the answer? There's one. You're living in it. So the question that we ask ourselves, again, which is not asked, never on television, and certainly not in Congress, how does it happen that we end up spending far, far more per capita? I live 50 miles away from the Canadian border. We spend about double what the Canadians do per capita on health care, and they cover every man, woman, and child. We spend almost 3 times more than they do in the United Kingdom, more than they do in France, Germany. And our health care outcomes in terms of life expectancy, in terms of infant mortality, are in many cases worse than many of these other countries. Well, that's a question we have to put on the table. And then the answer as to why we are the only major country not to guarantee health care to all through, I would hope, a Medicare for all single-payer program. The reason has everything to do with the power of the insurance companies and the drug companies and the medical equipment suppliers. They love the current system. Last year, the top 5 drug companies in America made $50 billion in profit. Top 10 drug company executives made over $300 million in compensation. It is a great system for them, not such a great system for ordinary Americans. And then we have got to ask ourselves, and we have some very clear language of how we go from here to there. We can create a Medicare for all single-payer system. It will save middle-class families money, guarantee quality care to all of our people. That's an issue we've got to put on the table. There is an issue question, and again, these are questions that we need to discuss. Why does our great country, United States of America, have more people in jail than any other country on earth? Why? Well, there are a lot of reasons why, but we need and the book tries to do that, tries to answer that question. Why is it that you have a country like China, 4 times our size and population, a communist authoritarian country that doesn't tolerate dissent terribly well, and we have more people in jail than China does? Why is it that over the last number of years, state after state, my state, California, probably your state, have been investing enormous amounts of money in jails and incarceration while cutting back on education and job training for young people? And I think most Americans know we need reform in local police departments around the country. I was a mayor for 8 years. I worked very closely with the police department. The average police officer has an enormously difficult job, works hard, and is honest. It is a tough job. But we need the kind of training which tells police officers that lethal force is the last response, not the first response. We need to be thinking about something that is so obvious. We lock people up, and then they come out of jail. I remember we did a forum on criminal justice in Iowa, and we had a couple of guys there who had been in jail, spent time in jail. And one guy said, never forget this, he said, the day before I was released, he didn't know he was going to be released, somebody came into him and said, you're getting out of here tomorrow. Here's a check for $75. Good luck. And then we are shocked that so many people who go to jail end up going back into the environment that got them in jail in the first place. We're shocked by the high rate of recidivism. And it is clear to everybody that people who are in jail need job training, they need education, they need decent housing. We need to make sure that they don't end up back in jail where we spend $50,000, $60,000 a year incarcerating them. A lot more sense to invest in housing and job training. And one of the major issues that I am quite confident that Congress will be dealing with after Mr. Trump is inaugurated will be immigration. Now, in my view, when you have 11 million people who are undocumented, I believe that the time is long overdue for comprehensive immigration reform and a path towards citizenship. It appears that Mr. Trump's point of view is somewhat different. And this is going to be a major, major struggle. But I will tell you that during the campaign, I talked to a number of young Latino boys and girls. And I talked to kids who had tears running down their cheeks, who were scared to death that one day after cutting out of school and going home, they were going to find that their dad or their mother had been deported. In my view, we need an immigration policy which unites families, not divides families. So those are some of the issues that we discuss in the book. And the bottom line is that for me, democracy in a civilized society is not a complicated idea. What it really means is that people come together, like we do here this evening, and we say, okay, what are the problems facing the country? And we may disagree. Some people may think this is a problem that I don't think is a major problem, and so forth. But that's part of the process. And then we say, okay, these are the problems. What is the best way to go forward and to solve them? Not complicated. But we do much too little of that. What campaigns are about are ripping about. There are people who make millions of dollars. You know what? Researching me for the last 50 years. Every dumb thing that I've ever said, there's a file this big. All right? It's called opposition research. Guys make a lot of money doing that. Figuring out how you can come up with a 30-second ad to destroy somebody else. How you come up with ads that are complete and total lies. All right? And our job as citizens is to demand a democracy of a higher level, to not accept that. So if there is anything I hope you get out of the book, is that I am not looking back, I'm looking forward. I'm looking, I believe there is a will in this country. We've just got to bring people together to create a nation in which we have an economy that works for all of us, that we do not forget people in small rural towns who are living in despair, people in inner cities who are in trouble, that we create an economy that works for all of us and not just the 1%. And I believe there is a will to create a political system in which billionaires do not buy elections, but in which we have a vibrant democracy of one person, one vote. So I want to thank you all for being here. I think we are now going to work on some questions which you have submitted. So how do we go from here? Somebody's coming up. Do I hear somebody?
Thank
Here you
so
are.
much.
Thank you.
Let's give Simeon. Well, thank you. Thank you, Senator Sanders, for being here. This is our 33rd Miami Book Fair, and I want to thank you for this remarkable talk that you just gave. Thank you so very much. Now, what's really interesting is I probably had maybe 300 questions, and the most interesting thing is you've answered each and every one of them in the talk that you gave. So I'm left with one question. What is your favorite film? No, in a more serious vein. Here.
You got me thinking about it.
What is your favorite film?
Thinking about it, I don't know.
In a more serious vein, probably the question that was the most prevalent is a question that has been talked about all throughout the book fair, and that is, given everything you talked about and all the important issues that you mentioned, and given the political reality we find ourselves in now, what can we all do?
I think we can, and I know everybody works hard. I mean, one of the things about America now is a lot of people, I saw this on the campaign trail, people are exhausted, you know? People work in long hours, mom works, dad works, they don't have enough time with the kids, marriages are suffering as a result. But I think in these difficult times, we are going to have to rethink our relationship to public life and to politics, and to figure out ways, and for each person it will be different, each community it will be different. But what I said a moment ago is what I believe, is that when people stand together around any and all issues, your voices will be heard. You will have an impact. You cannot be ignored. Cannot be. Politicians are many things, they're not dumb. And if they see, for example, give you an example, just one example, give you a million. A couple of years ago, virtually all Republicans in the Congress, not all, but virtually all, and some Democrats wanted to cut Social Security. A number of us worked very hard with senior organizations around the country. I was able to submit a petition with, I believe, over 2 million names on it. All over this country, people stood up. Disabled veterans stood up. Seniors stood up. People with disabilities stood up and said, you cannot cut Social Security. I was just on a TV show a few moments ago, an hour ago, and a woman called into the show and said, I'm scared to death. I'm barely making it now. And they're talking about cutting Social Security. We stopped those cuts. And in fact, during the campaign, the discussion was on how we expand Social Security. We did it because millions of people became involved in the process. Now, more than ever, you got to pick your fights. You know, not everybody's going to be out on the streets every day. You got to pick your fights and figure out how you can be effective. But think about it differently than you did yesterday. You can play a role in transforming this country. I believe that if this country, the people of this country, tell Mr. Trump, sorry, we are going to transform our energy system because we have a moral responsibility for our kids and our grandchildren to protect this planet. That's what you're going to do. We can do that. But in all of those things, we've got to be very smart. We got to understand that we're taking on people with incredible amounts of money, people who know how to manipulate the system, people who own the media. Tough stuff. But we have the responsibility to do just that right now.
Is there a resource that you know that people here in Miami can tap into to find out which groups they ought to be able to give their support to, whether it's time or finances?
Well, there are a million different organizations out there, and I don't want to mention one and not the other.
Right.
But by the way, as I mentioned also earlier, I hope to make, the Democratic Party is not that resource today. I hope tomorrow to make it that resource. I hope to make it the party that all of you feel comfortable about being in.
And I know that you have supported Representative Ellison to be the head of the DNC. Would you talk a little bit about his strengths?
You know, as I said earlier, in politics, you have to make fundamental decisions. And the decisions really are not complicated. Which side are you on? Are you on the side of the 1% that is doing phenomenally well? The 1% who make an extraordinary amount of campaign contributions? Are you on their side? Or are you going to be on the side of working people and families today that are struggling hard just to keep their heads above water? Are you going to be on the side of the homeless veteran who's sleeping out on the streets in Miami or in Vermont? Whose side are you on? And I hope the Democratic Party finally makes that decision. And when they do, I think they're going to find millions of people getting involved, and I think they're going to turn around politics in this country and become, once again, the dominant party that they should be.
Thank you. Someone from the audience points out that former Representative Dingell from Michigan tweeted something out. I hate to use the word tweet, but he tweeted something out, and he said, "Forget the basket. The deplorables are finding their way into the cabinet." How, in a realpolitik way, do you feel the Senate might go and
Let me say a word
oppose some of
on
these
so-called
folks?
deplorables. I really dislike that expression very much. Look, no question that some of Trump's supporters are racists and sexist and homophobes. No question about that. But that is not the majority of those people. And I think, one of the things that happens in this country is that people who sit down with a $200 bottle of wine and a $500 dinner have not a clue about what's going on in the real world in this country, about the suffering and the pain. And the people who get their hands dirty or may not have a college education You know, my parents didn't go to college. Doesn't make them deplorable. We got to reach out. And they have got to understand that that a party, the Republican Party that wants to give tax breaks to billionaires, and many of them want to cut their Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid, that's not their party.
So how as a senator, and how, I know how we as citizens can probably move, but do you have, given what we've seen so far from the president-elect, how do we make sure that we protect the First Amendment for a free press, the First Amendment rights for a free press?
Well,
and what do we do about that?
It's not just the First Amendment, it's how do you protect all of our rights which may become under assault?
Yes.
And the answer is, if people are strong and are prepared to fight back, we will win. If not, the future may be somewhat bleak. So my message is that no matter what the issue is, whether it's constitutional rights, whether it is the economy, whether it is the attack on immigrants or on minorities, we have got to mobilize our people and stand firm, defend the Constitution, and make certain that our people get involved so that we create a government and economy that works for everybody and not just the 1%. So there's nothing easy. It takes a lot of work. But again, I want to, at a time when many people are depressed politically, think back. Think back to when some of us were still alive, of the kind of segregation and racism that existed in parts of this country. Think about the role that women were forced to play 100 years ago. People struggled and they won and they made progress. That was true then, that is true today.
And without putting you on the spot, the next most popular question was, will you run in 2020?
Nope. My wife was said this, I'm quoting her. It's not the right question, all right? Because we got to struggle tomorrow. We don't want to get hung up, and I say this in all humility, and I thank so much for your support. Not about me. We got to struggle tomorrow. Our job is to educate, to organize, to mobilize people. 4 years from now is a very long time. We got other things to worry about today.
You talk about universal health care, and it's something that so many of us believe in. What do you think the straightest path to get that is at this point?
I think the problem lies in a corrupt campaign finance system. And that the first thing we have got to do is overturn Citizens United. And in my view, move to public funding of elections. What we also have got to do, and this worries me very much, and it's directly related to health care or the environment or anything else, is we have to pay a lot of attention and fight back against voter suppression. There are cowardly Republican governors all over this country who are afraid of free, open, and democratic elections, and they're trying to make it harder for young people, for old people, for people of color to participate in the political process. And we've got to resist that and move toward a nation in which everybody 18 years of age or older who's a citizen has the right to vote. End of discussion.
You know,
and when we do that, we will be able to take on the insurance companies and the drug companies. They are the impediments to a national health care system. They want to maintain a health care system in which they can make hundreds of billions of dollars a year in profit. And our job is to tell them that the function of healthcare, the healthcare system, is to provide quality care to all people in the most cost-effective way, not to make drug companies and insurance companies make billions of dollars a year in profit.
Most definitely. And it's interesting because the next question was someone from the audience pointing out that Florida has 1.7 million former felons whose votes were suppressed in Florida.
Absolutely. This is and Florida, I think, is one of the worst states in that regard. In Vermont, what our state has done and a few other states have done, we have done what was right. And that is, we said that if you served your time in jail, you paid your debt to society, when you get out, you have your democratic rights. But when we talk about voter suppression, that is certainly one of the areas that we have got to focus on. If you served your time, you have the right to regain your ability to participate and vote.
Thank you. Do you expect big fights in the Senate over the Supreme Court nominations to come? I know the answer, I think, to that, but how are the...
The answer is, of course, we don't know who the nominee is, so you can't, it's premature to answer it, but I think it is fair to say that, that will be the case, and I think it is based on, it's not only what we fear who might be the nominee, or at least the politics of the person who might be the nominee, but we come into that with the reality that Republicans in the Senate, their leadership ignored the Constitution and refused to even allow for hearings of President Obama's nominee. Now, all of you know the Constitution is not ambiguous about this. The president has the right to nominate somebody, and the Senate has the right to hold hearings and determine whether the person is qualified to it. And the Republicans said, Obama is president, we don't want to have any hearings at all. So I think that with that background, probably Mr. Trump's nominee will not win the most enthusiastic response from the Democratic caucus.
This is the way some of the much younger folks in the audience are feeling. This question comes from a 13-year-old. What can we do to keep Trump under control? Which I think is a very interesting question.
Well, again, I mean, all of these questions, and trust me, it's not just people in this room with 13-year-old kids, it is people all over this country are worried. And the answer, again, I don't mean to be beating a dead horse here, is that we have to rethink our role in our democracy. And that is, if there are actions that are taken that we think are unconstitutional or simply bad or unfair, we have got to stand up, mobilize, and fight back. That's called democracy. We can do that. And that's what we have got to do. Maybe just a few more questions.
Yeah, we'll just take 2 more questions. And the first one will be, can we take you to dinner? This is from, including Jane. This is from Jen and Lily out in the audience.
See, in Vermont, when we do meetings like that, we often have food. So maybe next time we'll supply some food. We could all have dinner together.
But actually, a more serious question is, what is your feeling about the Electoral College as well?
Well, as I began my remarks, Hillary Clinton got, we think, in California it takes forever for them to count votes. I don't know why that's so, but it does. But we think she will have ended up with 1.5 million to 2 million more votes than Mr. Trump. In a democracy, one might assume that if you get more votes than your opponent, you win. That's not the case now. And this happened, obviously, with Al Gore, and geez, something about the state of Florida about that one, I think. All right, so that's number one. Am I comfortable with the fact that somebody wins more votes than her opponent and is not inaugurated? I am uncomfortable with that. Number two, and maybe as a politician I see this more, we have 50 states in this country, and every one of these states has serious problems, and their people have needs. But what has happened in the last number of elections, everybody knows there are 15, 16 battleground states, Florida being one of them. So you in this state saw a whole lot of Mrs. Clinton, you saw a whole lot of Mr. Trump, because everybody here knew it was a battleground state and it ended up with a couple of points apart. Same thing with Iowa, same thing with Michigan, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Wisconsin, etc. Meanwhile, guess what? There are 35 other states in this country who very rarely see a candidate for president, who very rarely have their issues being discussed, their needs being discussed. There's something wrong with that. We are a nation of some 320 million people living in 50 states. Politics, in all due respect to Florida and the other 15 states, should not just be about 15 or 16 states. It should be about 50 states and all of our people.
You know, you've brought and energized so many people that I think the last question, you know, to ask, particularly after a very difficult week of hearing so many speakers be so fearful and concerned about where the future lies. What hope can you give us tonight, given all that you've seen, all that you know, and all of that?
I can give you a lot of hope. I mean, and I think, again, this country, you know, if you study our own history, there have been very, very dark periods. I mean, I don't have to relate to anybody in this room, you know, what, you know, people in this country way back when have done to Native Americans, African Americans, Latinos, you know, the struggles of the gay community and so forth and so on. And yet, over a period of time, people came together and they made life better. You know, 100 years ago, you had children working in factories, losing their fingers. And workers said, no, that can't go on. Public education, free public education didn't come out of nowhere. It came because people fought for it. So what I'm saying is, yeah, these are dark times. Yeah, they're tough. You know, I'm thinking back right now. I remember I went to an event in Vermont a couple of years ago, and they showed a film. I don't know if any of you saw it. Probably did. December 8th, 1941. What was that? Remember what that was about? That was the day after Pearl Harbor, and President Roosevelt goes before Congress to declare war on Japan and a while later on Germany. At that moment, the military of this country was not prepared to fight wars in the East and wars in the West. We didn't have the resources to do that. And yet, a united country 2.5 years later, for all intent and purposes, by the end of 1943, the war was essentially won. We were producing incredible amounts of tanks and planes and guns. The military was extraordinary. A united America took on powerful forces in Europe, powerful forces in Asia, and in 4 years won the war. So, yes, I understand that people are distressed. I understand that, but I would say two things. Don't lose faith in our capabilities. That's number one. We have come through very difficult times in the past. And number two, despair is not an option. You don't have when somebody throws their hands up and says, I'm giving up, you don't have that right, because it's not just about you. This country is not just about you. It's about your children. It's about the future of this planet. You want to give up, you know what that means? You're going to doom this planet, literally, as a result of climate change. You don't have the moral right to do that. So I think we got to rethink things and maybe worry a little bit less about football. I know I am treading on very controversial areas. And maybe pay a little bit more attention to the issues impacting our children and our parents and our families, and stand together. That's what, when I use the phrase political revolution, that's what it means. It's not that I have an 86-point program. It means that you've got to decide the best way forward. What does it mean? Here in Florida, you know what climate change can do to this very city. Are you going to allow an expansion of fossil fuel in this country to make a bad situation worse? I hope not. And you got to figure out the best way to put pressure on your elected officials, on Washington. Figure out ways to do that, and on many other issues as well. So, no, I am not, I am ready for a fight I hope all of you are ready for a fight. That's what we've got to do. Thank you all very much.
So wonderful. Thank you so much. Senator Bernie Sanders, thank you so much. That was wonderful. Well, thank you all for coming tonight to this remarkable evening. We have Senator Sanders' book is for sale out to my right. We thank you all, and we'll see you all tomorrow as well. Thank you.
All right, this is getting out of hand.
And that concludes today's coverage of the Miami Book Fair. We'll be back tomorrow.